it's not our nerves, not Ukrainians that Putin is playing. It's the Europeans and the Americans.
In Kyiv, are people feeling some invasion imminent, as the headlines suggest, or is life continuing?
Ready to do whatever they can to stop the invasion and to fight for their land.
I'm Joe Lindsley, talking to you from Lviv, Ukraine.
Hi, I'm Konstantyn Chyzhyk, talking to you from Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine.
Hello, this is Joe Lindsley. I'm an American journalist in Lviv, Ukraine. Ukraine is so often in the news these days, and lately foreign reporters are swooping in to cover the developing situation vis-a-vis the threats from Moscow. But despite all this increased coverage, so rarely do we hear Ukrainians telling us their stories and perspectives in English in a way so that the world can understand. To remedy this, the Lviv Lab has created a series of podcasts, of which this, Real Ukraine, is one. Here I speak with my friend and co-host Konstantyn Chyzhyk. Kostya is one of the smartest and most thoughtful Ukrainians I know. He was former director of the President's Investment Council under both Presidents Poroshenko and Zelensky. He has toured America as part of a U.S. State Department program for foreign diplomats. He spent some time studying at Stanford University. He worked for the EU delegation in Kyiv. He was also an advisor to Natalie Yaresko, the American-born Ukrainian finance minister in the days after the Euromaidan revolution of 2014. Kostya and I have so often discussed the promise and potential of both our nations, the challenges we face. So now, in this moment of global tension, we share these conversations between an American and a Ukrainian with you. What in your perspective is the mood on the streets in Kyiv? Are people feeling some invasion imminent, as the headlines suggest, or is life continuing more or less as normal?
Sure. So I'd begin with the general mood, which I would describe as pretty much positive. The first reason for that is obviously the inner state that Ukrainians are being in most of the time. That's being more or less positive, and regardless of anything that happens. And the part of that is the history that we've shared with our Kievans here living in the same spot. And this, at the same time, it's another reason for that is that we've got ready in a way that Russia might invade us any moment, since they've done this in 2014, where they've illegally annexed Crimea and part of the eastern territories of Donbass. So we've been living in a state of war basically with Russia for almost 80 years by now. And we've gotten in a way used to it, if I can say that anyone ever gets used to being in the middle of war with a different country, which is one of the kind of strongest armies on the planet. So apart from that, we're pretty much positive. And even if something like this happens, I believe that most of Ukrainians, and especially people here in Kyiv, are feeling pretty much ready to do whatever they can to stop the invasion and to fight for their land. And again, they're not looking for that opportunity in any way, no. But they're ready to stand their ground, and they're still being positive, and they're still being ready to accept whatever the fate or Putin is trying to throw at us.
Mm. Is it something that people are talking about a lot, even, or is it something? Does it not even come up in conversation very much?
Well, it depends for sure. People do talk about it, but again, it's up to the media a lot to determine the agenda in that regards. Because again, the news about the potential Russian invasion here and there from the south, from the east, they've been there all over the place for years. For 80 years already. So people more or less are getting used to those news, and the intensity of those talks pretty much depend on the rumors or the new information or the news coming in from the media. So I wouldn't say that they're like super much concerned with this, but at the same time, they're kind of being a little bit kind of cautious. So there were some narratives that some people in some rural regions, preliminary, uh, like go to the grocery stores to buy the essentials just in case if the war starts, the full scale war starts, just to be prepared. That's probably it. If you kind of talk to my friends and people that I'm usually talking to, they're pretty much relaxed. And again, they're ready to accept whatever is going to happen, but in a positive way. It's not that they don't care. No, it's just that they are kind of being a bit more cautious about what might happen either way. So if, for example, it's all kind of just like a muscle game that's trying to throw it at the US and at the West, well, we're used to that. That's one thing. If he really will try to kind of do some crazy thing and try to jeopardize our sovereignty again, well, he's going to pay a much higher price than the first time in 2014. I'm telling you that. I mean, I'm not a military expert in any way, but from the spirit that the people kind of share right now, they're much more motivated. The army is in much better shape, and people on the ground here are actually ready to stand for their land. So they're like really positive, I would say.
And as President Zelensky pointed out yesterday, I mean, it's the obvious thing, but and as you said, Russia has been invading parts of Ukraine since the end of the Revolution of Dignity, and so in some sense, this is it's nothing new. And there was maybe, I don't know how much you know about this, but I in those weeks and months after the revolution was successful and the pro-Moscow regime fled to Russia, that's when Moscow moved in and took Crimea. But even at that moment, it was uncertain. I mean, it seemed that Russia was also trying to take this, like a city like Odessa, and Ukrainian army was not, as you know, not in great shape, I think, back then. And the government was new. I mean, the revolution had just happened, and everything was a new beginning. But the people defended places like Odessa with very few resources. Is that an accurate way? I mean, that's the story that I hear.
Absolutely. I mean, actually, I would say that the situation was like even more green, that most of our intelligence services, the army, the security service, at that time in 2014, all those institutions were infiltrated with Russian agents, like literally paid by the Russian authorities, being controlled by the Russians. So we didn't even have that much control of our law enforcement and an army at the time. And even that, with that in mind, and even with the revolution, which just happened at that time, people on the ground in those regions like Odessa, like Kharkiv, it's also one of the largest cities in Ukraine. It's in kind of eastern part of Ukraine, bordering with the Kharkiv region, borders in a way with kind of Russia and Belarus. So people there who historically, according even to the Russian claims, have been kind of more pro-Russian, that's what Russians love to say. People there in those cities stood for their ground with zero resources, basically, against one of the strongest armies on the planet. And they defended their ground. The same happened in Dnipro, by the way, which is another large town in the east.
And Dnipro has almost 1 million people, right?
Yeah, I mean, all of those three are 1 million people. Kharkiv, Odessa, and Dnipro, they're a bit more than 1 million, all of them. So in all those places in 2014, like ordinary people, it was not the army, it was not that much law enforcement. It was mostly the ordinary commoners that kind of stood up for their land, and they did not allow Russians to take over. And that would happen then. And then nobody was prepared for that. Nobody was like seeing that coming at all. I mean, if I, even though I used to kind of work in kind of foreign relations at the time I used to work at the EU delegation to Ukraine, like the EU embassy here on the ground. Even though it was my kind of duties and responsibilities to kind of be engaged with the kind of foreigners on the foreign policy issues, I mean, if I was told like a few weeks or a month before Russia invaded Crimea in the east that would happen, I mean, I would probably I wouldn't believe it. Probably I would doubt it for sure, and probably I wouldn't even believe it. So no one was prepared, and still we stood our ground. And now the situation is totally different. We're like getting used to what's happening, and people in a much better mental shape and much better suited to fight back whatever aggression or provocative actions Putin will throw at us. And again, I assume that I may say that I can talk here not only on behalf of the people that I'm talking to in Kyiv, but in many other regions as well.
And I guess and also surely your military is would you say it's completely different from what it was in 2014? Completely
Absolutely.
reformed, or?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's yeah. Go ahead, please.
Well, I mean, you've had 8 years of assistance of training from NATO, right, and better weapons. I mean, and probably also it's more, as you said, it had been previously infiltrated by and I don't know if this is true of the military too. Was that all before 2014? Was that heavily influenced by Russia? Yeah, and that I mean, elements.
Our former Minister of Defense held a Russian passport. I mean, even several of them, not only one. That was a pretty common thing. A lot of the heads of the state security service held Russian passports. That was like a really common thing. And the same goes with the high-ranking generals and officers in the military HQs. That was the situation before 2014.
After Yanukovych fled, and that's when President Putin moved in to take Crimea. And one of his arguments, or one of his justifications was, well, most people in Crimea speak Russian, identify with Russian culture, so it belongs to us. And this, as I mentioned to you the other day, this has been a narrative that I'm seeing coming back into consciousness in the media and social media, with some very prominent and popular and influential Americans. And so there's an American commentator, popular in, I don't like the terms left and right, so I won't use them. So, but this popular commentator, Michael Chernovich, he's got 800,000 followers on Twitter, and influential among certain segments of Americans. And he put out this tweet saying, Russia is the dominant language in much of Ukraine. And that this is should not be any of our of the business of the West, because this is sort of a intramural Russian situation between Ukraine and Russia. There has been a resurgence of the Ukrainian language, for one, especially since 2014. But more than, I guess, probably more important than that is even Ukrainians who speak Russian, where, and this might sound very simple, but I think people might not understand this, but are there Ukrainians who speak Russian who don't want to be governed by Moscow? How do you describe that situation?
Look, I speak Russian most of the time with my friends, but I certainly don't want to be governed by Moscow in any way. Most of Ukrainians understand and speak Russian in some sense, yet at the same time, it doesn't mean that any one of those people in any way affiliate themselves with Russia. It's like the same way. It's like similarly, if you would say that, people in Switzerland, they speak Italian, French, and German. So does it mean that there should be no Switzerland and the territory should be kind of split between Italy, France, and Germany? No, that's not the way you see things. And that's a very dangerous narrative, by the way. Here we should consider history a little bit. And I would say two points here are important. A, why we actually refer language as one of the key components of national identity. And I believe the reason for that is in the creation of the nations, countries, like countries based on a single nation. And that one of the first countries like that was France in the 17th, 18th century, when most of the people there were French and spoke French. That made them French country. But since then, like 300 years passed, and now we're predominantly cultivating multiculturalism and mobility. And that's the essence of the global economy right now. That's the heart of the European Union, that it doesn't really matter what language you speak as long as you share the common values and as long as you want to cooperate with one another. And the second narrative, which is important also, is the Second World War. And as far as I know, that was one of the Nazis' narratives and stories that they've used to initially occupy Austria, saying that, well, basically Austrians speak the same language, they speak German. So basically there should be no separate Austria. There should be like one huge Third Reich or whatever. And that was a very dangerous idea. And if you kind of think of that from that perspective, that's pretty much the same that as Russia are trying to speculate over right now, trying to say, well, Ukrainians partly or mostly speak Russian, so why should there be a separate country?
And as I think of that, there's an element of history that gets ignored, and I'm aware of this maybe as an Irishman, is that the even as far back, I think, as 1802, the Russian Empire sought to delete the Ukrainian language in the same attempt, maybe, perhaps, but to ban the language the same way that the British banned the Irish language to erase reasons for these people to exist as their own country. And so whether it was the Soviets or back to the Imperial Moscow days, there have been attempts to remove the language and the culture as a way to gobble up the nation. Yeah, President Zelensky said yesterday, Russia is just trying to destroy our nerves. There's no reason to worry so much. There were headlines about, Russian troop buildup last March. This happens every now and then. I remember in December 2018, I was bringing a group of American young entrepreneurs to Kyiv, and 3 days before that trip, two Ukrainian ships were captured by the Russian Navy. I think in the Sea of Azov, and at that moment there were headlines, invasion imminent. So this has happened time and time again. Is there, and maybe this is something we'll have to explore in future episodes, but in the sense right now, could you briefly say, do you think that do we have to be more circumspect about this? I mean, is like all of a sudden, because the world is afraid of what Russia might do, Russia is able to make new demands on NATO and the West about Ukraine? Is there some sort of psychological game that Putin is playing here, and what is the best way to respond to that?
So I'll start with saying that we can only speculate on what's happening right now because I don't know what's in Putin's head. I think nobody does, at least not in as far as the people that I know are concerned. So my assumption is that, yes, it is a way that he tries to play on our nerves. But a very important point is that he probably mostly is not affecting Ukrainians, but he's targeting Europeans and Americans. And I'll explain you why. Again, we are used to that game since 2014. And every kind of speculation like this, in a way, helps Ukrainian build up a better society, more prepared and ready, both technically, military, politically, economically, and security-wise, against anything that might happen from the Russian side. So we know our enemy, and we've been battle tested since 2014 numerous times. Unfortunately, a lot of my common Ukrainians died in that war, and they've paid the ultimate price, unfortunately, for the craziness of our eastern neighbor, Russia. Unfortunately, that happened, but at the same time, those people sacrificed their lives in order for the others to understand the enemy better. So we were much better prepared right now. And we hope that if Putin attacks, would be in a much better shape. But it's about the U.S. and in Europe right now, whose nerves are being played, I would say, because a lot of the people that I've been talking to since 2014 and even now, it seems like are unaware or not completely aware, I would say, about the threats that Russia is posing. And one of the reasons for that is that in the West, it's just so uncommon and unusual for someone to behave the way that Russia behaves, and people don't really think usually in that categories. So when Putin annexed Crimea in the east, I actually heard some German diplomats share the kind of inside story that right before that happened, very high kind of officials who were in Germany part of the kind of phone calls between Merkel, Chancellor Merkel, and Putin, they kind of heard that Putin kind of said that he's not going to do anything like this, and kind of gave the guarantees in a way, if you can say so, to Chancellor Merkel that nothing like this is going to happen. And when it happened, when Putin annexed Crimea, when Putin annexed part of the eastern Ukraine, the Germans who were part of those talks didn't really believe that it might be true. So they started talking to the Russians, trying to double check, well, if that's actually happening, because they thought, well, Putin is not going to lie in the face of the federal chancellor, right? I mean, it's just unspeakable. I mean, as stupid as it might sound, but that was the kind of the way the people thought of the situation, and that were the like really high level people with years of experience in foreign relations.
Wow.
So what I'm trying to say here is that it's not our nerves, not Ukrainians, that Putin is playing. It's the Europeans and the Americans. And the thing here, a very dangerous thing, it's not only that a lot of Europeans and even Americans might underestimate what Putin is capable of, but there also certainly are, because of their unreadiness to see the actual threat, they are making it worse themselves by swallowing whatever Putin has been throwing at them since 2014. And if you pay a little bit more attention to that, you'll see that even the Soviet Union, in my humble opinion, hadn't done the things in such a brutal and open manner geopolitically like Russia did in recent years.
Well, and this has or maybe you see the fruit of this or the result of this, for example, in that I thought pretty extraordinary and maybe disturbing press conference yesterday from President Biden, where he predicted sort of casually that, oh yeah, Russia will, quote, will move in, quote, to Ukraine. Just accepting it, okay, this is definitely happening. And that is, you could say that the campaign to fray the nerves of the West has been successful. And I wonder, and as we close here, the Wall Street Journal a few weeks ago had a report. They have their sort of their artsy story on the front page every day about some sort of unusual topic, and there was a story about officials in Kyiv looking for the bones of Yaroslav the Wise in an attempt, and a quote from the Wall Street Journal was that they were attempting to bolster Ukraine's case for sovereignty, as though Ukraine needs to, and Ukrainians are striving to argue why they should exist. Now that we can, I think that's a whole different topic to go into that bit of the story, but that phrase, bolstering Ukraine's case for sovereignty, coupled with sort of casual remarks, from the president in Washington that, oh yeah, Russia's definitely going to invade further. Why should a free and independent and self-governed, people-governed Ukraine matter to the world, to the West, to free societies?
There are two main aspects to this. The first one is ideological, is that if we kind of say that we share the values of individual freedoms and rights, And as a result, as we share the principle of independence of state and the right for people to determine by whom should they be governed, that's the very kind of core principle of democracy. If we share that sort of principles, we cannot allow some crazy tyrant in the East, just because he has the military muscle, to jeopardize this whole philosophy. And there's the second, more pragmatic aspect to that. It's because it's not about Ukraine right now, but it's about the European security. There are people in this world who understand only one thing: force. That's it, period. And I assume, as far as I can tell, that Putin is one of those. People like this, they kind of test you in a way. They're like pack animals. They kind of bark at you and see what happens. If you allowed it to happen, they would bark at you more, and then they would come and bite you a little bit more, and then they would come and bite the hand, and then they'll eat you. So that's what they do. And if you allow them to do whatever they kind of want to do, they'll do it. And there's only one way how you can stop them from doing this, is by force. And this is something that I believe a lot of European politicians are missing right now, that it's not about Ukraine. It's about their security. Because if they will give up those principles and the Ukrainian sovereignty and territory today, tomorrow it's going to be up to Estonia, up to Latvia, up to Lithuania, up to Sweden, up to Norway, up to Finland to defend their lands.
You know, and that's interesting that you mentioned Norway and Sweden. I was thinking a lot about that recently. Norway has a land border with Russia, and there are occasionally tensions there. From my time in Sweden, aware that there's often cases of Russian submarines getting close, toward Stockholm, and a little bit of sort of poking the Swedes, and so I think we think it's only Ukraine, but you're right. I mean, there's a threat to Europe at all different places, and that has to be part of it, And yeah, I think these are further things to explore, because there's a lot going on. Whether it's in Kazakhstan on the other side or the European side, there's a lot of moving pieces that while we get swept up in one particular narrative, maybe we're missing a lot of other points.
I'll just want to finish with one important thing, historical one, to kind of give an example of how, unfortunately, things might develop. I hope they won't, but one of the scenarios, doesn't it resemble like anything what I've just described that already happened in the 20th century? Isn't it pretty much like the beginning of the Second World War, when Hitler wanted to annex Austria and then wanted to annex part of Poland? Isn't that exactly the same when Britain and France thought, this crazy guy, let him have it. We don't want to kind of get in fight with him because he's out of a kind of a superpower at that time. So let him have it. He's going to kind of get a little bit calmer, and he's not going to go after us because we're France and Germany. We're France and Britain. We're too kind of big for them. But that's not what happened. They allowed Hitler to get stronger by annexing Austria and Poland and part of other territories. And then when they realized what they were facing, it was too late. Yeah. And that's pretty much what is happening right now with Russia.
Man, Kostya, thank you so much, man. My friend, let's. I look forward to continuing these conversations and sharing them with others. And thanks, man.
Same here. Really appreciate it.
Stay well and happy and prosperous in Kyiv. And I'll sign out here from Lviv. This has been the Real Ukraine podcast, produced by the Lviv Lab for the Activation of Democracy. You can find more stories and podcasts at lvivlab.com. That's LVIVLAB.com. And this is Joe Lindsley signing out from Lviv, Ukraine. Do побачення. Goodbye. Thank you.